on in. In the early days of InfowarCon, Hans Mumm wanted to bring a UAV for a live demo.
They're out there right now. They look like boring bees, but I think they're UAVs. Those buggers are huge.
And we had it all planned out, with the one exception. The hotel neglected to tell us it was going to be like $30,000 because we would have had to remove the entire front door revolving structure. Needless to say, we didn't do that. On the coin, obviously, we have a drone symbol because that's part and parcel a lot of what we're dealing with these days. And Hans is comes from that space. And so please, Hans Mumm.
Thank you. I'm going to give you a little bit of a chat here. I want to make sure that first thing off, I don't have all the answers. I have a couple of different ideas. I've come to a few different conclusions. As you can see, it's applying complexity to leadership theory. Most people haven't heard of it because it really didn't exist before I started creating it for my dissertation. And that's how I ended up getting the title of doctor, was to create this. The interesting part behind this is most of the time complexity theory is looked at in the way of mathematics and other things. I applied it to the humans and a little bit different. So as Wynn had said, I've actually been speaking at InfowarCon since the late 1990s. And in between times, I actually hadn't seen Wynn in many years or Betty in many years. And so I wanted to just catch a couple of people up because I do see a few familiar faces since 1999 as to what I've been up to and how I ended up back on this stage. So if you've ever seen the Iraqi regime playing cards with Saddam as the ace of spades, I was the officer in charge of that program. After 9/11, I made a conscious choice to leave the world of actually good money, guys. Leave that world, and I designed a multiple fuel optimization system using artificial intelligence and pumping sensors a different direction. I was also working on UAVs. On 9/11, I was actually cresting the hill, headed to the Pentagon to meet with them because at the time UAVs were not a nice thing. They were not interested. I know that somebody had done a presentation before and said, you know, now that we have their attention, well, now we have their attention with UAVs. I was cresting the hill. The plane went into the side of the Pentagon. My business partner at the time, Jay, was sitting in the Pentagon parking lot. He was an old F-111, F-15 fighter pilot, and he saw the black smoke. He knew it had happened. He called me on the phone. He said, turn around, go home. It's done. And I called my commander. I was a reservist at the time, called my commander, decided I would go on active duty from there. So needless to say, so what happened after this little project? Go ahead.
I would add that information-wise, coalition governments have identified a list of key regime leaders who must be pursued and brought to justice. The key list has 55 individuals who may be pursued, killed, or captured. And the list does not exclude leaders who may have already been killed or captured. This list has been provided to coalition forces on the ground in several forms to ease identification when contact does occur. And this deck of cards is one example of what we provide to soldiers and Marines out in the field, with the faces of the individuals and what their role is. In this case, there are 55 cards in the deck.
How many are there? You have to go to CNN.com.
Your deck of 55 most wanted. Does that include the former information minister? Because every pack needs a joker.
Well said, Jeff. Well said. Well, there are jokers in this deck. There's no doubt about that. And that is also, there are cards that have joker marked on them.
So after I enjoyed some free vacations to Iraq, and by the way, I'm not really quite sure, a lot of you might be in the military here. I haven't quite figured out when I volunteered to go and I went to get my tickets, they gave me one-way tickets. I'm like, guys, isn't it cheaper to give me round trip? They're like, no, one-way tickets, you get to fight your way home. So after ending up as a wounded warrior in 2009 and being tossed out of the military after 16 years, 9 months, they said, you ain't making 20, take the medical and go. I went ahead and did that. Started off in writing books, and I also helped design a new type of helicopter flight simulator. This is actually the world's first and only FAA certified portable flight simulator, which means it's so advanced that literally when you fly in this thing, you can actually log time in your logbook. I also, current activities, I was just picked up as a fellow for autonomous systems by Cyber Conflict Documentation Project. I finished up my doctorate out of Colorado Technical University. I'm starting to teach with California University of Pennsylvania. I'm an adjunct professor for American Military University. Now, I was down here a couple of weeks ago, and I met with Wynn for lunch. And after I got done explaining all this, Wynn looked at me sternly. He says, son, you are not reaching your potential in this world. He said, you need to come and speak at InfowarCon. So here I am.
Achievement unlocked.
So, complexity theory leadership in the current FAA challenge. What I did was I actually applied something called complexity leadership theory to the FAA drone integration challenge right now. Their challenge, of course, is that the policy leadership and management of UAVs, they are looking at it, they being the FAA and the US government, are looking at very linear and very authoritarian. We are moving in this direction, and you will do it because I tell you you're going to do it. Okay, now all of us here are probably over 15, maybe 20 years old, possible. How's that going to work out for the kids today? You going to tell them what to do? You going to look at them and say you're going to do it because I tell you you're going to do it? No, nope, not going to work that way. The FAA has been trying for 15 to 20 years right now to come up with UAV legislation, governance, and policies. Anybody know how many they have out there right now? Correct, it's about 0. They actually have stuff that's out there in the public. You have to be very careful when they put out information operations, when they put out some interesting articles, because the articles will talk to the idea that they actually have UAV policy. That's not what it says. It says that they have policy that's being put out for public comment, which means it's 3 to 5 years away. Go ahead and hit that one. So the issue becomes that there's a lot of different challenges that are coming into play. You've got everybody from Amazon and companies, and people are saying, well, this is just a stunt. It's not a stunt. Amazon actually owns this company. They own this UAV company. They're moving forward with or without the FAA, with or without the games from the policy leaders. They're going to move forward. So they're moving forward for several different reasons. Again, this isn't just a publicity stunt. This is how they're going to start to move packages, because they also understand our roads are getting more clogged, our airways are getting more clogged, and humans are expensive. If I can send this out, everything that you do on Amazon is all connected already. So if you go ahead and say, I want this package, I want a hard drive shipped to me, they can literally send it this way, and it's all automated. So as much as there's some interesting stuff on the web that this is a stunt, it's actually not a stunt at all.
It didn't ring the doorbell.
Well, you know, it probably sent a signal to the wireless doorbell. But the challenge is most folks out there look at UAVs and they think of them as drones with missiles on them because of the Predator. They think of them in the way of militarization. The government is spying on us. The Fourth Amendment issues, a lot of that type of stuff. As Wynn famously says, get over it. The Fourth Amendment issues are no issues. You've had satellites over you for over 20 years. Why are you complaining now? Because you can now see them. So it's a little bit different of an issue. Okay.
You can hack.
Yeah. Okay, so who's claiming to be in charge? And what has happened to leadership over the years? The interesting point is that this is really where it is, right? You've got everybody out there whining and crying about oversight and the government wringing their hands and everything else. And this is what's happening in real society. People are out there right now. You and I can go buy a drone for $100, $200. We can fly it. And what are they going to do? The only thing that the FAA can do is come and yell at you and threaten you with a monetary fine. By the way, they tried this already. They had a gentleman who was he was paid commercially to fly his UAV over a crowd and take pictures. The UAV actually did end up, according to the FAA, buzzing the crowd. They felt that that could be dangerous to the crowd, so they went and they gave the guy a $10,000 fine. They brought it to court, and the judge said, okay, Mr. FAA man, please explain to me where in law, policy, or governance that this man did anything wrong. We can't. Case dismissed. Instead of the FAA just saying, okay, I'm going to lick my wounds and go home, they're actually appealing the case. Okay, so that's your good hard taxpayers at work. So what's happened to leadership over the years? The challenge that we face right now is that things are moving so fast. I don't think anybody in this room really believes that Moore's law hasn't already been broken. We're moving so quickly now that we can't afford this idea of linear and authoritarian anymore. It's not going to work. In the past, we used to have leaders. We used to have situations that were going to change humankind, and we would act and react to them. So we had things like the satellites and nuclear weapons that came on. Both events, you ended up with worldwide governance, not with the internet and flashing stuff around in microseconds, but you ended up with worldwide governance within 2 years of both of those events. The internet happens. Is there any response from Congress? Is there any response from a governing body that says, you know what, guys, I'm not trying to stop this, but there are things that humans do for the good and for the bad. We just need to be able to get basic governance. Nope. They never said a word. Internet changed humankind. The first time a politician opened his mouth about it, he wanted to try to tax it. The internet of internets came back and said, here's Bitcoin, go ahead, open your mouth again. Not going to work. We need to look at different leadership. So drones come along, and they've been around 15, 20 years, depending on how you want to do your calculations. I actually used to play with a Predator in 1994 when the U.S. Army used to own it. And then we had to give it to the Air Force for two reasons. One, we couldn't afford it. Two, the Air Force was whining because it was a fixed wing and we're the Army, one of those things. So, no offense to Air Force, right? So the challenge was that here again is a technology that's going to change humankind, not just UAVs, but robotics, okay? I've had a robot vacuum for over 12 years. So these things are going to change humankind. Response from our leadership, absolutely nothing. Nothing. So we need to start looking at things a little bit different. So what I did was I looked and I was attempting to explore a new direction or a new idea. And I looked at the complexity leadership or complexity, and I started looking at how can I actually take that from a mathematical equation and certain other things and actually apply it to a leadership realm. Understanding that since we've already gone through linear and authoritarian, and that works to a point. I mean, it does work in the military to a point. But now if we start looking at nonlinear, non-authoritarian, self-organized entities, what's that going to mean? So can you hit that real quick? And why is that?
Hello, my friend. This is Airspace Russia again.
Has anybody seen
got
this? I'm
something
assuming
very,
lots of
very
people have
special for you
seen
guys
this, so I
today.
won't let this go too far.
This, my friend, is a prototype quadrotor. Now, it may look like something you've seen before, but believe me, the technology in this baby isn't going to be out there for at least another decade.
And he's wrong. This is an actual old video,
It
and most of
doesn't
this
even have a
technology
technical name
exists out
yet,
there
so
right now.
for now, we're just going to call it Charlene. Now, let me show you a few of the features here so you'll understand why I say this is truly a weapon of the future. In the next 10, maybe 15 years, shit is going to get very real. We're talking about some pretty sophisticated warfare,
And the soldiers are going to need technology like this to get above the combat, around their enemies, and get into tight spaces. This is why Charlene is unlike anything I've ever seen, and I've seen some crazy shit. Now, most of the quad rotors that you've seen on YouTube are doing some pretty sophisticated maneuvers, and none of those toys is equipped with a submachine gun and a 100-round magazine. Also, Charlene is capable of flying up to 30 miles per hour at altitudes of a quarter-mile high. Oh, and it only takes one professional Russian and this fancy tablet to kill you. This thing in itself is pretty impressive. It's got a lot of cool features. The most impressive thing is you see everything that the quad rotor sees. So the biggest benefit is getting that bird's eye view of what's in front of you. And once you know what's in front of you, maybe you don't want that in front of you anymore. When they send Charlene over the hill, see what we can see.
So does anybody think this might be hackable?
Looks like we've got some lost and confused visitors over there. Let's take a closer look. No, I don't think I recognize any of those guys. Let's take them out. That was awesome. Look at the guy's head rolling down the hill. Let's try something else. So we've seen what Charlene is capable of doing on a recon mission. Now let's try putting her in a situation she's well suited for. Sneaking up on some evil beaches and hard to reach places. It looks like our friends here decided to have a little dinner party, and they didn't even invite us. And one of them brought a whole bucket of gasoline. We'll just have to show these guys a little hospitality, Charlene style.
Okay, so go ahead and go to the next one. If you guys are interested, you can see the rest of that video, but I don't want to take too much time with that
That'll
one.
be over dinner.
There you go. We can do that. So, so here's the thing, though, is you have technology like that proliferating out there in the world. It is not sitting with the militaries. It's sitting with civilians. And civilians are able to do this rather rapidly. Why do I know that? Back in the early 2000s, I had a project that was requested, and it was actually looking at the world's cheapest sniper. And it was a smaller version of what you saw there, and that was the early 2000s. Had a zip gun and a CCD camera on it. All of the stuff was out there. I bought it all off the shelf. You can buy all the stuff off the shelf right now. The challenge is that when you saw the thing that said that there was no control, no governance, the issue becomes that the U.S. government is now so far behind the 8 ball that we're not going to catch up. So we need to draw a line in the sand and say, okay, we've already lost. What are we going to do to try to fix it? And they're not doing that either. The UK actually came up in 2000 with their own governance for UAVs. You can look it up online. They've actually updated twice since 2000 their UAV governance into their national airspace. That's how far behind we are. So again, time for a different idea. So if you look at complexity in general, and these are just the two quick definitions that I was using when I actually did the experimentation for the dissertation. In complexity theory, a system can be described as a collection of intricate interacting parts which together function as a whole. This interaction is so intricate that it cannot be predicted by linear equations. There are so many variables involved that the behavior of the system can only be understood as an emergent consequence of the sum of the constituent elements. What I was looking at there was the idea that with UAVs, you have UAV groups, you have individual people, you have governments, you have military and law enforcement, you have all of these different people. There's going to be emerging behavior in each and every sector, and you've got to start figuring out what the leadership is. What is the governance? Is a police force allowed to use it to be able to go and take a suspect out? Yes or no? Or is that a military function only? Right now, again, we are so linear that that's all we can do is think one for one. It's not going to work that way anymore. We've already proven it's not. So a sample of a complexity in action, basically, I know this, most of this crowd actually probably knows all this, but this was a base presentation. Basically, you look at all the way through. The problem for a school of fish is self-protection of the smaller fish against the larger ones. What do they actually want to do? What's the vision of the school? And remember, it's a self-organized entity. Each individual fish does not have the information, does not have all of the information to make this work. And there is no leader. There's no linear leader or authoritarian fish saying, you will do this. This is all self-organized entities. So the idea is, if you look at this, the philosophy itself, you move towards the center of mass, move in the same direction of the fish near you, and sacrifice the fish on the outer edge if necessary. So you start to make different assumptions. Yes?
Isn't that Marxism in a nutshell? I mean,
so to a point, if you're looking at schools of fish, yes, but what I was trying to demonstrate was simply you're moving towards the same goal. So complexity leadership method. So if you look at the method of complexity leadership itself, basically you can look at it and you can arrive at a solution set where several stakeholders and several related problems and issue sets are looked at the same time in a nonlinear fashion. And you can also look at them in non-authoritarian fashion. I'll explain that in a minute or two. So on the bottom, I actually have this thing called UAV Aviators. Has anybody ever heard of these folks? They're humanitarian. It's a self-organized group, a self-organized entity. I would highly encourage you to look at them on the web. Very interesting group. The gentleman who started it understood that UAVs were nothing more than a truck for sensors. The real job of the gentleman who started it is big data. And what he was looking for was different ways to be able to get big data, be able to analyze it, and get it back out to the world. Well, what he did was he started this thing called UAV Aviators, and it's a humanitarian UAV platform. It's all self-organized, and what they did was they actually have governance, they have policies, they have rules, and they have complete structure for the entire world. They actually list every single country and what every single country's UAV policies are or are not, so when they fly in the country, they know how to keep out of trouble. Again, completely self-organized. Nepal hit the other day, 4 hours before WTOP, the news service in Washington, D.C., 4 hours before they sent something out about Nepal, UAV Aviators were already on social networking, looking to see who had assets in Nepal to be able to fly and start rescue missions. 4 hours before the news service even had it. That's the type of leadership that we're looking at. So one of the issues that the FAA has right now is they look at different definitions, but they also look at how do you take UAVs and put them into the airspace, and what does that mean? Well, one of their issues that they are not addressing in the policies and other things that they're putting out is the level of autonomous behavior. So if we go to this axis here, basically, you're just programming the machine, you're letting it go out and do whatever it needs to do. And they actually have some interesting machines out there. When you look at trusted, independent self-governance and minimal intervention, there's actually a UAV out there that can swarm There's more than one in the system itself. And if you give it a goal and you tell it, I want you to be at Wynn's house at 2 o'clock, and it actually, and the swarm ends up hitting headwinds, they're smart enough to know how to actually cut corners in order to obtain the goal at the right time. They will do whatever they need to do, speed up, use more fuel, whatever they have to do to get the goal. So that's the level of autonomy that's out there right now. The FAA is still looking at the idea of remote control vehicles. They're still like looking at the idea that, you know, we've got a kid with a joystick, you know, flying a bird someplace. Oh, and he put a camera on it, so now I've got to worry about Fourth Amendment. We're so far beyond that that it's not going to catch up. Now, I keep kind of beating up the FAA a little bit, and for full disclosure and understanding, I actually did talk with the FAA. Mr. Williams, who actually runs the UAV programs for the FAA, got me to their MITRE people, and we worked through some issues. One of the big challenges that the FAA has is actually the governance structure itself, and that gets back to the authoritarian linear nature. So they actually are under this thing that they have to deal with right now, and it takes approximately 5 years for the ARC. For the Aviation Rules Committee, in order to change one rule for the aviation community, it takes approximately 5 years. 5 years. Is that going to work? Moore's Law is dead already. I think we're beyond the 5-year idea. So the challenge becomes is that all the policies and things like that are being talked about are down here in the manual remote control world, or maybe simple automation where you can jump the bird in the air and on an automated platform. But in the real world, that video that you saw from the good old Russian, that's an older video. The real world, we're all the way up here. Governance has long since been blown by. Leadership has been blown by a long time ago. So I created the initial vision and philosophy set for the UAV issue, basically creating the simplest path possible for the UAV community to integrate fully into the national airspace. If you look at what the FAA cares about and how they need to do it, one of their big issues, of course, is no significant risk to human life. Well, there's a lot of different risks in UAVs, but you can minimize those risks in different ways. But we have to start to think differently. Why do UAVs have to use the same airport, or can they? How is it that we integrated balloons and helicopters and gliders? We've already done this in the past. Why is it that UAVs are so much of a problem that they can't figure it out after 15 or 20 years? Yes?
There's an interesting example in the north of Scotland. So the delivery example is particularly valuable to communities reliant on boats in bad weather, because you can still fly a pre-programmed path. They've done proof of concept with large UAVs, and just to drop off the post or something. And if you've got a local community begging for it, it's totally different at the other end of the country where you're in conflict for airspace and frequency.
Exactly, and one of the reasons why I like I said, I kind of beat up the FAA is that there are places in the world that can see beyond the linear nature of what they're trying to do. But our governments and our government simply can't here in the US, which is very frustrating because even FedEx and UPS, they have active UAV programs right now where they're actively trying to figure out, how do I fly large amounts of cargo from here to here without human intervention and without having to worry about paying pilots? So there are people that are out there that are trying to figure out these things, but without being able to get everybody on the same page, it's really difficult. And right now, our government is just stuck. Using the next generation system to facilitate the process, I don't know if anybody has ever heard of ADS-B. ADS-B is actually the system where we can use GPS instead of our current airways. That system is over 10 years behind. And again, somehow that's okay. Where's the leadership? How is it that we went from a nuclear blast to 2 years, the entire world was on the same page, yet an issue like this that is so important to our economies and everything else is sitting, languishing almost 20 years behind. So again, getting back to the idea of you know, a few different ideas on things. Many people believe that decentralization means the loss of control. That's simply not true. You can improve control if you look at control as the control of events and not people. And that's where the difference of that is. Because I'm looking at controlling the events, not necessarily the people. And then the more people you have controlling events, the more people you have that care about controlling those events. The more people that you have proactively working to create favorable events, the more control you will have over the organization. This is nonlinear thought. So the scope of the project that I did for my dissertation, basically I had looked at at mainly leadership. I did not look at technology specific, because we already know that UAV and a manned aircraft can fly in the same space. That's not the issue. That comes down to people and leadership. So I actually looked at different things. I did limit it to the U.S. airspace only because I was trying to address the U.S. governance issues that we have out there. And then I based it on you know, lit reviews and other things. But I did go out, and it was rather interesting to sit down and do the interviews for the dissertation. I ended up talking to 20 subject matter experts on this, which took me a long time because there's hard to find 20 actual experts on these issues. So I ended up talking with them, and it's actually interesting to find out which direction that they would be interested in going. Most of them understood nonlinear, non-authoritarian, and they were good with that. Self-organizing entities started making them a little uneasy. And then some people, when they were talked to, they actually looked more at their own pocketbook and what it would do to them personally and their company. And that's an issue. So there is a huge disconnect in definitions, and I also find that out through the research and talking to the FAA and other folks. Right now, we use the word drone, UAVs, unmanned air systems. Everybody's got a different term, and that confuses the situation. And that also confuses the solutions.
Is there a difference between those?
Correct. So there is. It gets back to the autonomous slide. So you can look at a drone as more of an autonomous vehicle versus a UAV, which is an unmanned air vehicle, which is more controlled by a human with a certain level of autonomy on it. So there are different ones, but the challenge is that between the media and the FAA doesn't help because it doesn't actually give these definitions when they put out these press releases. The challenge is that the media puts out a lot of stuff out there, and so it was the Predator UAV way back when, and now it's used for a lot of drone strikes. So now they use drone strike. So they've actually changed that without explaining to people what the difference was. So the difference with the Predator itself is you used to have a pilot who was dedicated to flying the vehicle, and then you had a payload person, and then you had a weapons person. Those lines are being blurred a little bit more. And now you've got the ability to actually make the Predator an autonomous vehicle in a lot of ways and basically just monitor it. We monitor it because we're not 100% sure yet that we can trust the vehicles, and also because right now we're not going to give a computer the ability to do a kinetic strike. I think we will, though, at some point. Actually, I don't think we're going to get that far off. So, so what I did was I looked at the UAV integration as a complexity network, and I started to discuss this with the FAA and a few other people, the UAV communities, the drone user groups, and other people that are out there. And one of the things that I found is that right now, the way that the Aviation Rules Committee works, everybody has a say. So if you go out for public comment, everybody has a say. Well, we've got the FCC right here, and if you actually track back to what they're concerned with, do they really care about airworthiness of an aircraft? Probably don't. So why do they have a vote? Why are they in the middle of all of this?
They control the radio frequency.
They only control the radio frequency, though. They don't control, you know, how many threads I have to have on a bolt, right? So why are they in here? The challenge is they're in here because we've always had them in here. Because our governance structure from Constitution forward has always said that our governance structure is linear and authoritarian.
But if your frequencies interfere with my garage door opener, I'm going to have an issue. So the FCC has to be part of it.
Correct, but they have that has to do with the radio frequencies, but not how many threads I have on a bolt on a wing.
Right.
It's not going to matter.
So they won't comment on that part, but they will comment on the frequency part. So they have to be part of the discussion. And the only
they
part
are
of the
part of
discussion
the
that they're going to
discussion.
group on is a frequency part, period.
So they're allowed, but they're allowed right now to actually comment on the whole thing.
Right, with no expertise.
Exactly. So this is actually a mind map from MITRE, and this is what the FAA is looking at when they were attempting to figure out policy. The major difference is that in the middle of this, they talk about community outcomes, the routine UAS, unmanned air systems, which is different than what the FAA was talking about with unmanned air vehicles and drones. And these folks work for the FAA. UAS integration into non-segregated civilian airspace. They were actually looking at different ways to integrate, but not integrate. So if it's in the middle of nowhere, is it actually integrating into the national airspace? Sitting over the ocean, it's probably not really integrating into the national airspace. So even the folks that are working on these, there ends up being a disconnect. So who actually, there's a lot of questions out there for this. These are just some teaser questions for you. Who owns it? So who owns a UAV transitions over your house? Who owns the airspace? Well, right now the FAA says they do. Do you agree with it? There's, yes.
It's a good application for routing to inspect routes and surveys become cheaper.
Exactly.
The current policy, though, FAA was trying to stop a lot of that activity for commercial use because they didn't have a policy to address that. And that's a significant problem for a huge range of folks in disaster recovery, for example, where can you assess a damaged structure? Right now, we're using commercial overhead imagery to do this. That's only 0.6 meter resolution, though.
Well, for historic buildings, it was the only way of doing it in the UK. So all our large cathedrals that had maintenance, this is how it's now done.
And that's why the UK has governance on UAVs.
It's also used for inspecting smokestacks, cooling towers, and so forth.
So
Exactly.
what's the relationship between the FAA and the FCC, though, because those airways are obviously dual use?
So the FCC has the ability to control all airways. The FAA can tell you what happens with the aircraft themselves. But they work together when you're talking about like radios and frequencies and certain like things like that. But the challenge is the bandwidth has opened up. We've sold more of the bandwidth, but we're behind in things like ADS-B. So we're selling more of the bandwidth to be available for commercial use for GPS, but we're behind in ADS-B. So the FAA is still trying to play catch up when it comes to the stuff with the FCC in order to be able to get off of our old frequencies and flying the needles. So they do work with each other, but the challenge is should the FAA allow the FCC to come in and stop a policy that has to do with airworthiness? One has nothing to do really with the other, but right now the way it's written, there's a lot of people who can come in with comments and stop where they may not want to do that. They may want to go a little bit more non-authoritarian and be able to have more groups look at it instead of just individuals who have their own budgets and their own rice bowls to worry about.
Is that a matter of checks and balances, or is it just, well, that's the way we've always done
Matter of separation of authorities, and it's a matter of the way we've always done it. And rice bowls. Rice bowls is a big part of this. So who owns it? Solutions. If you look at political borders, ownership, certain things like that, we have an issue, not just in the US, but around the world where we have not defined this very well. So because of the lack of leadership on this issue, when a Predator UAV went over into Iran accidentally, you laugh about it. Of course it was accidentally.
Not a word. Not a word.
When it was accidentally done, Is it an act of war, an act of aggression, or simply an accident?
The reconnaissance is never war.
So, well, here's the difference though. Our predators are armed.
So most reconnaissance patrols.
There you go. So here's the thing, is that Iran said that it was an act of aggression headed towards an act of war as they started to light up their missile base, right? The US is standing back going, guys, we're just screw ups. Okay, that's giving me confidence as an American citizen. We're incompetent to fly them. Okay, I'm not really happy about that answer either. But the challenge is because we haven't actually had definitions and we're not on the same page, anybody can decide what they want it to. It means whatever they want it to mean. So they have the ability to literally go out and start launching because we made a mistake. Was it a mistake or not?
If we use that line of logic, though, doesn't that allow Russia and China to fly UAVs in our airspace?
If we had governance, it wouldn't.
Because again, we have existing open skies deconfliction mechanisms for reconnaissance activity. We have existing mechanisms for air intercept, air defense identification mandates that cover a range of other activities. We don't have the same structure in the drone world.
Right. So, no, and that's exactly it. But here's the thing is and this was one of the things I had legislation on years ago that never went anywhere with the drone issue with the White House, right? So you had an issue a couple of years ago where we kept having Cessnas break the barrier over near the White House, and then you started having you had a drone that did it, right? Well, years ago I went to the Air Force and I said, guys, we need to at least start to look at this a little bit different. And they were saying, oh no, it's perfect, perfect. I said, okay, guys, let's look at this logically. Right now, everything you do is based on human intimidation. Well, that's not true. Okay, so when an aircraft flies towards the White House, a little sergeant, usually, who's watching the scope, sees something that shouldn't be there. He just opens up an SOP book. Number one, hail all frequencies. Well, there's nobody to talk to, it's a UAV. Number two, tell your boss he's going to scramble up. I understand what that means. It's a UAV. There's nobody to intimidate. Now what are you going to do? Well, the general that I was talking to at the time, oh, we're going to shoot it down. I said, really? I said, it's balsa wood and a snowmobile engine. I said, your radar is tuned to balsa wood and a snowmobile engine? No, it's not.
A gyrocopter either.
Exactly. Can't get a gyrocopter either. And I said, no, it's not. I said, now what are you going to do since you can't lock missiles on this thing? Oh, I'm in hopping guns. Oh, really? You live in a CNN world. Every single round you pickled off of that thing is a dead grandmother or a dead baby. Doesn't matter if you hit the side of a mountain. Ask CNN. It'll be a dead grandma or a dead baby, right? So you're not going to do that. I said, General, that's all I'm asking you to do is start to think. What are you going to do in the eventuality? The eventuality was we agreed to disagree because he was a general and I was an idiot.
And this issue
So
this issue persists even into other conflict zones. When we were looking at the Baghdad perimeter around Bayat, there was zero discussion for a very long time about how to maintain the airspace against drones. We had every other kind of defense. We had all these air defense assets hanging around, but nobody wanted to deal with the drone problem because, oh, well, we weren't seeing it, except we were.
Yeah. So the challenge was that when I ended up sending a follow-up email, I basically asked, at least start to think about the idea, can you use a net on a C-130 to get it? What do you want to do? Because General, both of your ideas to me could have actually helped the enemy because you don't know, is there bugs and gas on that thing? If you hit it, did you now just become the dispersing device? I never got an email back. I don't know why. I was surprised I didn't get an email back. So some of the electronics that are out there, right? You've got direct energy protection. You incorporate some of the stuff into aircraft now, right? All this stuff is great, but again, what are we going to do against UAVs? There's actually a little Mirage chip. Some folks may know about it. It's a very expensive chip. It's about $100,000 a chip. But it's a mirage chip, and it actually makes things disappear because it makes it blends it into its environment. So you start taking a UAV and start putting some quiet stuff on it, blend it into its background surroundings. It's going to go away. There's also something out there that was called the John Wayne rifle at one point, and the idea behind that was that if the sensor could actually see you one time, it would actually paint you, and no matter if you went behind the pole and came back, it would not shoot until it saw you again. So it wouldn't waste ammunition. So it would actually paint you, and you could put this this type of stuff on UAVs as well. Network items, something that might be of interest to this crowd. Here's the thing. You can hack these things. They've been hacked. The downlinks have been hacked for the Predator. The Hunter UAV was actually on the open internet. It was using an 802.11 protocol, and it was on the open net. So the stuff that the military birds are supposed to be seeing, which should be semi-protected or classified, is actually in the open. And now we're only getting to the point where we're starting to think, what happens when they actually hack the aircraft itself? Now they own it. Do I really care if I can get to the sensor itself? Well, if I can use the sensor, it'd be kind of cool. It'd be fun, but I'd really rather own the aircraft because now I own it all. It's out there. So there's a couple of different things there for those. You create a targetable common operational picture with some of this stuff. With what they're trying to do with UAVs is kind of lift the fog of war, but it actually can create more of a fog of war if we don't create a situation where they're secure. So that's basically where we're at, applying complexity leadership theory to drone airspace integration. And this is where the FAA is right now. They're getting swallowed up by civilian drones into that airspace. And thank you. So this is actually a draft of the front of the book cover. The book comes out in July, and that's all I've got on that one. Questions?
All right, so you talked about the governance issue with the U.S. Makeup of it being deliberately slow, with the opposite end of the technology going extremely fast. Where is that balancing point to be able to affect that we're not rushing to creating bad policy that has a lasting effect?
So I think that you have to look at certain things. And although I agree with the balancing act, I think at some point you have to hold somebody accountable and somebody speak to the fire. 20 years is not a balancing act. 20 years is an abomination against my government, and yet nobody in the FAA is being held to account to anything at all. And I think that that's where we have to look at the idea that, yes, we are slow and deliberate on purpose. And the Constitution was set up that we would have this interaction and that we would have a fight every now and then and disagreement, and that things would be done slow because we were supposed to be for the people, by the people. Who thinks we're actually a government for the people, by the people anymore? If you do, talk to me afterwards. I was just a Ways and Means Committee the other day, and I will change your opinion of that.
Or as Mark Twain had said, if the voting would make a difference, they wouldn't let us do it.
There you go. So I think that we have right now, we do have a balancing act of it, but the challenge is that technology is moving so fast that we have to start looking at a different form of leadership itself. Not saying that we have to throw our Constitution away or anything like that, but we have to start looking at the idea that linear and authoritarian will not function in the society today. It won't. You tell these kids right now not to do something, it's not going to work. Right now, you tell them you go out and you tell a kid, don't fly that UAV.
I know. I see it
So,
with the folks that are coming in. It's not so much of a questioning why questioning the authority. They want to know and understand why they're doing what they're doing. But if you just put the hammer down, they shut down and they're gone.
Exactly, and the challenge there though is that even some of the people that I interviewed for my dissertation, the reason why they did not want integration was because their company would be hurt. Tell these kids today that I'm doing it because I want more profit and I want you to lose profit. Watch how fast they're going to change. It's just a different idea.
Just out of interest, what are the centres of excellence in the US for UAV drone research?
So I'm going to answer the question two different ways because there's actually two different centers. There is a Center for UAV research under the US military, and we have a couple of those drone centers. And then we have the FAA centers. Now, the FAA gave out 5 licenses for centers, Alaska, Virginia, everything else. What they didn't do was give any money for them. So what they did was they said, you as an individual, as a business owner, I'm the FAA, you're a business owner. You want to use your UAV for commercial purposes. I said no. You said, okay, well, how do I do it? I said, go to a UAV Center of Excellence in Virginia. Great. I go down, okay, I want to test this because I want to use it for real estate or I want to use it for whatever. The center looks and says, that's awesome. You've got all this paperwork and this data on the stuff that you want to do. That's great. We just need $500,000 or so to test your aircraft.
So why don't you test in the UK then? Because I noticed that some of the American providers are doing just that.
They are doing that.
So the
And that's
University of
what's happening.
Southampton, I've put it in the Twitter stream on InfowarCon 2015, but Jim Scanlon, who's the professor there, ran into the same issues of you can't fly in my airspace over my dead body.
Correct. And that's actually why South America is becoming big. UK, because they have the governance, is becoming big. And again, America is struggling economically, as much as folks want to say that we're not. We are. Okay, we're struggling economically. The last time that we struggled economically like this, the only thing that really brought us out was called the internet. And the internet brought a big boom. But the internet is a new technology that was going to change mankind. We did nothing. Now we've got another one. We have another perfect way to be able to lead the world, another perfect way to be able to help everything else. And the only thing our government's doing is binding our hands and saying no. So the government, the excellent centers are out there. The one in Alaska is actually doing pretty well. Most of the other ones, though, are hurting so badly for cash that they'll probably close up. And they just won't be there. So that's how far behind we are. So, oh, and I'm getting the hurry up.
So we all love to laugh at the Amazon video with, you bringing it to your back porch. In certain places in this country, it's a lot more likely that there's a guy on the back porch of his house sitting there with a shotgun getting ready to shoot one of these things down.
Yeah, I have a drone hunting license in my wallet.
Let alone the fact that, with the civilian drones, the issue of surveilling other people in your neighborhood or things like that. So ownership, is interesting in terms of borders, but it's also interesting in terms of property rights.
Yes.
Can I declare my ranch a no-fly zone for UAVs?
Well, I'd love to tell you the answer to that, but the FAA is 20 years behind.
Is there any height restrictions?
So again, depending on how you want to interpret the law, there is. 500 feet is one of them, but there again, if you read, so I'm a helicopter and a fixed wing pilot. So my fixed wing license says that I have to stay above this. I have to do all these other stuff. My helicopter license says do everything opposite of what the fixed wing says. So if you actually look at UAVs, you can put certain restrictions on them, but then you also have to look. Right now, according to the stuff that's out there and how law enforcement, because again, if you start shooting, somebody from law enforcement can show up. Right now, what they're saying is it's a nuisance, and it's a variance. It's a nuisance issue, and it's within the law under the nuisance laws. But here's the thing: it's an attribution issue now. Right? So if you call law enforcement and I've got a UAV and it zips away because it sees the police car come up, right? It's attribution. Who knows who bought that? And again, this is where what I'm trying to do is just throw the idea out there that the old leadership will no longer work, because if the FAA 20 years ago had even started one piece of paper 20 years ago and had built it to the point even where the UK has it now, you have to register. There's certain things you have to do. We don't have any of that here. So if you're interested, we'll go buy a UAV and we'll get some really cool pictures of Wynn's house. So, okay, so I think wind's throwing me off. So if you have any other questions, let me know.